Thanks for tuning in. You're listening to the Embrace Mental Health podcast,
where we embrace a not-so-clinical approach
to conversations surrounding all things mental health. Hello and happy Mental Health Monday, everybody. I'm your host, Kelsey, and I've got my co-host, Wesley, with me. Hi, Wesley.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Kelsey.
And today we have our episode back we're the 1st of March already, which is crazy. I don't know how time goes so fast, but as per usual, our beginning of the month episode has to do with a therapy topic. And so this one, like last time, beginning of February, we had ways that you can maximize your therapy. This month, we're looking at some ways that you might be sabotaging your own therapy. So, but of course, before we get into that, we have our introductory question. So today's introductory question is one of the times that you have laughed the hardest. And Wes, I'm going to let you go first.
Okay, sounds good. The time that comes to mind for me is I was probably mid-20s, so several years ago. And my parents had gone on a vacation, and us kids and our spouses were there. Just kind of, they had come home, and we were seeing pictures from their vacation and just kind of getting together. And maybe we had some other event going on too, like a birthday party or something. And they were showing pictures from the vacation, but the way that the pictures, like the files, were organized when my mom dumped them from her camera is they were just completely in a random order. They were not chronological at all. And she took a lot of pictures of seals. And so, and anyone who's seen a picture of a seal's face up close knows that they are just like the most goofy looking animal in the world. Like just their faces. Obviously, they're also beautiful, but they are goofy. And so there would be pictures of a nice dinner, beautiful scenery, and then just a seal making the most ridiculous face. And then there would be, the cruise ship they were on. And that, so you can picture like every 2 to 6 photos, it felt like there was just a random seal just kind of jumping off. And my youngest sister and I were the only ones who found it funny, which of course makes it even funnier to us. Like we could not stop laughing, and everyone else is just like,
even more funny.
Yeah, we get it. It's funny, but here we're kind of watching the pictures. So anyway, that's what came to mind for me. I'm sure that there have been other times that would compare to that as far as how hard I laughed, but that's what came to mind.
Yep. I feel like for me, I don't know that there's been many times in my life where I've laughed really hard. So I can't really think of like a specific one that just really, really stands out as like the hardest I've ever laughed in my life. But I feel like there's a definite recipe for many of the times that I can think of where especially sleep deprivation seems to add to the comedy somehow. Of just like when you're in that slap happy mode, and yes, you're just like everything is 20 times funnier. But it's actually funny. I talked with Autumn last week about Hope Camp and how that's the worst sleep of my life, which I think consequently has also led to a lot of the times that I've laughed the hardest in my life, because I've just been so tired that hanging out with my basketball girls and just playing funny games and stuff like that is just a lot of laughter. And it would be hard to explain to people now why things were so funny. But at the time, when you're just a little sleep deprived, it can get pretty funny. But yeah, actually just last night, ended up hanging out with some friends. We were just like hanging out in a kitchen, reading this bottle of, it's some sort of like oil. I actually don't even know what it's from, but it's like the most ridiculous advertising like description of it, including it's like I said, it's like, I think it's supposed to be a substitute for olive oil, but like it just describes it as like, this is going to rocket fuel your metabolism and has this really nice fatty mouth feel. And like we were just cracking up laughing at like the craziness of the written description of their products. But just spending time with friends and just laughing like is the best medicine, as they say. So
absolutely.
But yeah.
sometimes the funniest times are, of course, the times where you had to be there to understand how funny it was. And you had to also be sleep deprived, because if you just were there and not sleep deprived, you still wouldn't get it.
Okay. So we'll just jump into our topic here. So we've had similar formats before, I feel like, where Wes and I will kind of take turns. Before, we've had tips. This isn't exactly tips. We're not giving you tips on how to sabotage your therapy, but
anti-tips.
Just different ways, I guess we'll go with. Yeah. I can go ahead and go first. So again, as I kind of preface this a little bit, but this is just going to be some of those ways that you might be, like, if you're in therapy, first of all, thumbs up. That's the first step, and that's often the hardest step. But there are still some ways that you can approach your therapy that are either going to make it less effective, could even be as far as ineffective, or just, make it challenging and kind of take you on some detours rather than helping you get to the place that you want to be a little bit quicker. So the first one that I have is just going into your therapy experience with a closed mind, whether that's at the beginning, whether that's part of the way through, if your therapist is wanting to, maybe start something or try something new. Oftentimes, the vast majority of the times, having an open mind about something is going to help you have the best experience, no matter what that is. And that's true in therapy too. So, I think in my limited experience of, I was a pro bono therapist for a while, and definitely had clients who would come in with that closed mind, and have had other friends or close, family members who have gone in kind of with skepticism. And not to say that you can't have any skepticism, because that's something you can work with, with your therapist on. But if you just go in with a closed mind, arms crossed, you're not going to open up about anything. It shouldn't be a surprise to you that that's not going to be an effective way to experience therapy or to deal with your mental health just in general. And, if you don't do something different in your life, you're going to end up kind of stuck where you are. So if you go in expecting that it's not going to work and then it's dumb, you're going to get what you were expecting, because you're not going to open up, and then you're going to see therapy didn't work. Well, you didn't really give it a chance, did you? And so, going in with an open mind and being willing to try new things, because, that age-old adage of, if you keep doing the same thing, why are you going to expect different results? And so sometimes it's going to take doing something different. It's going to take doing something that you're not comfortable with to get you to a different place, rather than the same issue that you might have just been stuck in for a while.
Yep, that's good. That reminds me, one of the most, I would say, influential books for me professionally that I've ever read. It's called Persuasion and Healing, and it's by a father-daughter team, both with the last name of Frank. So it's by Frank and Frank. I don't know their first names, but I think it was originally, the first edition was in the 60s, and the most recent update was in the 90s. So it's been around a while, but it's really interesting, at least for me, and maybe for some other people out there. They take kind of from an anthropology standpoint, a look at different forms of healing in different cultures across the world, from therapy to witch doctors to other types of spiritual healing and many other examples. And they try to find the common threads. So what are the things that are present in all of these types of healing that are effective, even when every single piece of it may not be measurable or something that we can put in a lab and just kind of put chemicals together and make it work. And so there are some interesting findings. I won't go into detail, but one of the big things, obviously, with the title Persuasion and Healing, is that both the person who is doing the healing, so in this case, we would say the therapist, and the person who's being healed, in this case, the client, they have to agree that it's going to work, or at least that there's a likelihood that it could work or it should work. And so, obviously we're all aware of the concept of a self-fulfilling prophecy, but I found it interesting. That's something that they actually researched pretty systematically and found that, yes, indeed, if it can't be forced on you. It's not a chemical reaction. If I take a medicine to help with a certain illness that I have, and I don't think it's going to work, well, that might actually have an influence on the result. But I think that probably the chemicals are still going to do what they're going to do. When it comes to therapy, absolutely. If you think it's not going to work, there's an extremely low chance that it will, unless there's like some little part of you that actually thinks that it will. So, and vice versa. There's something to positive thinking. There's something even to placebo effect, which sometimes can be a legitimate result for people. So yeah, definitely that openness to, okay, I will at least give this a fair shot, can make a big difference in getting the results that you want. I will go ahead and go with my first one. And one way to sabotage therapy is defensiveness. And I would add to that kind of a similar vein, ego, right? So of course we all have an ego, but you're going to therapy to get help in some way, even if it's just kind of improving in an area that's already going well. But I would say more commonly, people are going to therapy to solve a problem that they feel kind of stuck with. That's probably the case 80, 90+% of the time in some form or another. And so keep that in mind, that you're going for help with something that you cannot do on your own. It doesn't make you a weak person or bad in any way. It's just that you're stuck, and we all get stuck sometimes. We all need some help sometimes. Sometimes we need help from trained professionals. And so that's okay that you're stuck and that you need help. But there's a good chance that you are part of the problem, that your thinking, your behaviors, your choices may have put you in a situation where you're facing these problems. That's just the reality. And I will tell you that I do have clients who they come in, and at first the problem is everybody around them. And it's like, okay, well, what are we going to do about that, right? They're not here in this room. They're not seeking help. They may not even be looking to change or are open to change. So what can you do about that? And at some point we find out where their actions or their inactions do actually play a role. Even if they're not kind of the most active creator of this problem, they still play a role. And the sooner that you can let your guard down and be open to the ways that you may be a part of the problem, the sooner you can find ways that you can influence the solution, right? This is kind of it's a two-sided coin. It's kind of a wonderful thing when you realize you're part of the problem, because then, hey, I can actually do something about it by changing my behavior. So that would be one tip, is to just be open to that. Be open to, hopefully your therapist is gentle and kind. I would expect there's a good chance they will be. They're not going to just rip you a new one, but they might offer up some ways hey, this behavior that you're doing doesn't seem to be working, or yes, they're doing this thing, but you're kind of letting them do that, or whatever it might be. Be open to those kinds of things.
All right. So the next way that I have that it could be an easy way to kind of be sabotaging your own therapy, and I think is probably a common one, is kind of being content with just always letting your therapist take the lead, or not even letting, almost kind of making your therapist take the lead, right? Like you kind of come in and you sit down and you're like, all right, what do you want to talk about? And the therapist is like, what do you want to talk about? I think it's hard sometimes to kind of play in the social cues with it, because, there is a certain level of, when you have a conversation, there's back and forth, right? But this isn't a normal social situation. This is a trained expert who is trying to help you get to where you want to be. And so, there certainly can be times when you're not entirely sure what the next step is to take. But I think, I've just seen a lot of people who they don't take initiative in their own mental health journey. They kind of want everybody else to pull it out of them. And so it's like, well, I didn't really get much out of therapy because, well, we talked about this thing and, or the therapist directed this way. And, there's a reality of which the therapist can only talk about what you bring up. And so if you are kind of closed off, or you are unwilling to kind of take lead and take some of the initiative in your own therapy journey, then, that could be a place where your therapist is just trying to figure out what you're wanting to talk about. And you end up not dealing with the actual issue that you want to talk about, because you are kind of playing a passive role in the therapeutic relationship. And really, you want to, you're the master of your own destiny. You want to take initiative and you want to be in charge, and your therapist is there to kind of help you and sometimes be your guide. But a lot of times, I'll hear people say well, I don't understand. They go to therapy, but they don't really seem to be addressing this. And I'm like, there's a way in which, therapists are not mind readers, and they're not, they can't deal with anything that their client is not bringing up. And so you want to make sure that you are, taking some initiative in your own therapy journey, and not just expecting your therapist to do all of the work for you.
Yeah, that's just not going to work. There's actually a phrase common among therapists. I think I'm an LPC, but I think with probably social workers and psychologists, this I believe I've heard this in other disciplines too. It is don't do more work than the client. And that's not just a therapist self-care thing, even though there is that part of it too. But it's that it's just not going to help. It's not going to be effective. It has to come from you ultimately. And your therapist is there to assist and to support and to give perspective and all kinds of important things. But ultimately, you're the one who has to initiate. And so, yeah, if you're going into therapy and just kind of waiting for something to be done to you, that's a way to sabotage your therapy. So, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Kelsey. Very well said. And actually, let me go ahead and jump ahead because this is number 3 for me. And I wasn't sure if it was going to be along the same lines of what you were going to say. Mine was expecting the therapist to do it on their own. So that really is along the same lines. But let me go with kind of a backup that I had for this one. And that is, you can sabotage your own therapy by not correcting your therapist. Okay. There are, I would say from my perspective, as far as how many good therapists there are out there, it is kind of a bell curve. So if you picture like a slope that goes up and then back down again, it's like most therapists, I would say, are good therapists, and they're going to do a good job and help you. And then on the far right end are the great therapists, and they're really outstanding. And a lot of it has to do with who's the best one for you. It's about fit. But then on the other end, there are a fair number of therapists who are not very good at what they do, or perhaps they're just a bad fit for you. And so we've talked about this a little bit in previous episodes, but it's possible that the person who you're with just isn't effective with you. And it's good to give them a chance. But one way that you can help with that is to actually bring that up and kind of confront that, again, in a gentle way, understanding that hopefully they're trying to do their best. But say, hey, you seem to be misunderstanding what I want here. Like you're talking about this thing, and I'm really here for this other thing. I've talked to quite a few people, even people in my personal life, family members, who it's like, I wanted to talk to my therapist about this, but they seemed really obsessed with this other thing that I mentioned, which to me is not even really a big deal. And so there is some kind of interplay there where it's like maybe you should listen to what the therapists think is a big deal. Maybe it's a bigger deal than you realize, but ultimately you are both here for you. And so let your therapist know if give them some gentle correction. And there may come a point where it's like, yeah, they don't seem to be listening to me. I think I need to find somebody else. But hopefully it doesn't get to that point in your case, whoever you are listening to this. So yeah, don't be afraid to correct your therapist. And oftentimes that can be maybe a turning point for you. That can be the most valuable discussion you have with your therapist. So don't be afraid of being mean. Just remember that your therapists are humans too. And they're subject to error and biases and all kinds of things. And so they might need a little bit of help and correction from you sometimes.
Yeah, I can see this being difficult for both just people who are a little bit more passive in general. Like that can be difficult to, like if you're used to letting other people kind of take the lead, then, working towards building up the strength to take some of your own initiative, but also for the people pleasers. Like I've definitely fallen into this in some of my therapeutic relationships where it's like, oh, I don't really want to correct them because they're almost right, or, something like that. But realizing after the fact, like I might have had a little bit more of an effective experience or gotten where I needed to a little bit quicker if I'd been willing to say, no, actually, that's not exactly how I'm feeling, or having just that initiative piece of taking control of your own mental health and taking control of your own journey and recognizing like there is a reason that we're going to therapy because, ultimately they are going to be somebody who can help you. But if your therapist starts going this way or, off course just a little bit and one little correction helps get it back on track, they don't really necessarily know that they're off track unless you tell them. And so, you're
giving them a gift.
Yeah, exactly. And thereby yourself a gift.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, from that person's perspective, you think that you're being nice and you think that you're not giving them a hard time or something like that. But then at some point they're going to realize it, whether it's when you end therapy just because you stop showing up because you get frustrated, or maybe you confront them about it. Confront is a strong word. Maybe you bring it up with them several weeks later or something. Well, then at that point, it's like, why did you kind of string me along like this for so long? You're really better off, addressing it early on.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so my third tip, nope, it's not tips, that's right. Third way you might be sabotaging your therapy would be, it's really just avoidance in general. There's a lot of avoidance type behaviors that you can exhibit in all areas of life, but especially within therapy. But specifically, I would say just kind of avoiding your biggest issue. And the reason I say this is because this is what I did for a long time. And part of that was because I hadn't acknowledged what my biggest issue was. So, for those of you who haven't listened to my story, I had dealt with anxiety for the majority of my life. So I kept going to therapy saying like, hey, I'm dealing with anxiety. Hey, I'm dealing with anxiety. And they would give me, some different ways to, some relaxation techniques or trying to, somewhat talk through it. But it wasn't until my like mid to late 20s that I finally realized, okay, the reason I have all these anxiety issues is because I experienced sexual abuse as a child. And so that played a huge role in where my anxiety was stemming from. Now, one of the ways that had kind of manifested itself in my life was through phobias. But I mean, like a good phobia, the way that it kept building up is I just kept avoiding it. And I honestly, it was something I avoided in therapy too, where they would say, well, is there anything bigger that you want to have, to discuss or whatever? And just being like, no, I'm content with just dealing with this anxiety, but I did not feel ready to deal with the phobia. So I oftentimes just would not bring it up with my therapist. And so then it, kept getting worse. And there was, I have grace for myself because there was a certain extent of which I wasn't necessarily ready to face my phobia yet. But at the same time, I still kind of wish I had brought it up because then my therapist might have been like, okay, so we're not ready to face the phobia yet, but let's maybe address what's keeping you from feeling capable of that, And so even if I wasn't ready to just full on head on deal with my big issue, I still, my therapist would have been aware of that issue and then able to help me get to the point where I felt capable of dealing with the issue, rather than just kind of trying to guess where my anxiety was stemming from or, in some ways, I guess that symptom management that we've talked about, rather than digging to the roots of it, actually, just kind of dealing with the weeds that were popping up. And so I think there are some times where people go into therapy and they avoid the major issue because they're not necessarily aware of it yet. And that's part of the therapy journey as well. But I do think there are certainly times where people avoid the major issues because they are scared. And I've been there, still there in some areas, that it is scary and it is overwhelming, but you're going to be stuck in that same place until you deal with it. And even if your therapy journey for the first year is just helping you tiptoe your way up to getting to the point where you can deal with it, that's still better than tiptoeing all over the place and not having the major issue in mind. I think sometimes people, it's kind of like, it was sort of like going to the doctor and you have strep throat, but you keep showing the doctor your hangnail. And then you keep being like, man, my throat just keeps getting worse. Why? But your doctor doesn't know if you keep showing them the hangnail or you keep coming up with that. And so, avoidance in general is going to not just keep you where you are, but most of the time kind of you're going to keep getting deeper into the hole. And so that would be one way that I think I've seen other people too. You get into therapy, but you don't actually deal with the main issue. You're dealing with smaller stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, very good point. Well, that actually kind of is I feel segues a little bit into my last point here that I want to bring up. And that is you can sabotage your therapy by looking for a quick fix. Okay, so whatever issue you're going to therapy for, hopefully there are some things within the first 2-3 sessions or so that be able to take away and apply to your life to see a noticeable difference early on. That's great when it works out that way. Oftentimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But to actually address the root of the problem, like Kelsey is talking about, to actually get to the thing that is probably causing all of these symptoms. And if you keep on addressing symptoms, then probably that kind of root problem is going to manifest in some other way and some other symptom. So to actually get to that point where you've worked through it, it is a journey. It is going to take some time. You've got to play the long game. It may not be months or years, but it may be in some people's cases. And so you have to keep that in mind that it's a long journey and you're going to take steps. You're going to notice some significant difference along the way. But to actually get to where you might want to get to and have a lasting change where you've really grown and transformed as a person in the ways that you need to, it may take some time, and it's definitely going to take a lot of work. Here's another area where I want to reference research. There's been research done, and I wish I had the author's name on the top of my head because I didn't prepare this ahead of time, but I remember learning about it in my supervision. And the research showed basically they were measuring at what point in therapy is the average point for diminishing returns. How long do you have to go to therapy before it stops being effective because you've kind of met your goals. And it was pretty interesting. And of course, we're talking averages. And so it could vary pretty wildly from one person to another. But the average, I think it might be kind of the mean for most people is, I believe it was a year, like going to therapy for a whole year. After a year, there was still effectiveness, but it wasn't quite to the level of effectiveness that it was in that first year. And then I think for most people, after about 2 years, there was a more significant drop off where it was like, yeah, I'm just kind of going to chat. And that's weekly therapy, by the way. That's not biweekly. That's not monthly. That's weekly therapy. And so just to have those kinds of expectations, it's like to get to where I really want to get and not fall short of that, it might take right around a year to get to a place where I feel very good about where we're at. And I might still have work to do for a whole extra year if I really want to, get close to 100% with this, to keep that in mind. So I had a client just recently, and I don't even know if I'd call them a client because it was just a one-time therapy session. And they're like, yeah, I think I got what I need. See ya. And it's like, okay, like, I'm glad you found this helpful. Think how much farther we could go. And they had their reasons for doing that. But it just brought this to mind that it's like, okay, maybe you've got some coping techniques for some of your symptoms, but to see real major lasting change, it is going to take time. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And that, just an encouragement for people too. This kind of it ties in well with I had a little bonus take here. And one of the ways I think you might be sabotaging your therapy is by not going to therapies. But, like Wesley said, like if you've tried it before, but you've only gone like once or twice, really any kind of thing that you want to do that's going to be a major change or like major shift in your life. And that's, what we want essentially. It's going to take more than once or twice. It's going to take, repetitive behaviors. It's going to take, there's just so many layers to mental health too. Cause that was, what my experience has been like, it's like, okay, the first 3 months, like we worked really hard towards this. And then I was feeling better about that. And then I realized, there's still that layer that's on top of it. And so recognizing like, yeah, like he said, it's the long game. And, I just would encourage people, like, obviously we've been proponents of therapy here, but just prioritize your mental health. Why not this year? Why not this year be the year that you decide to kind of take steps towards that thing that might scare you a little bit, that might be difficult, that might be a long journey. You might have to put some other things on the back burner for a little bit, but why not this year? Why not take that time and prioritize your mental health for this next year in therapy and all the other different ways too? But yeah, like it's not a quick fix because mental health is complicated. Our brains are complicated. Emotions are complicated. Trauma is complicated. It's not just, some of the ways. I think that's why a lot of times I feel like I see a lot of correlation between physical therapy and mental health therapy, because just going to a doctor, like a lot of times, we've used the thing before. If you go to the doctor because you have strep throat, they'll give you an antibiotic and it will only take a week, hopefully, for that to kind of clear up. But when you're dealing with injuries, which is what a lot of times you're dealing with in physical therapy, it takes multiple times and you have to rebuild muscles and you have to relearn how to walk sometimes or, those kinds of things. And I think that's a better model for what mental health therapy looks like. We experience injuries. They're emotional injuries and those are not easy to heal. And so a lot of times it takes a lot of learning new habits or getting to the root of the problem, but it's just so worth it when you actually deal with that and you stop kind of just being content with limping around. So that would be my challenge for those of you who haven't even gone to therapy or have never even tried it. Like, why not prioritize your mental health and understanding that it's not a quick fix, but it is really beautiful when you can make headway in your life that way.
Absolutely. There's one little addendum I want to add to what I said about the whole, that research about a year before you start to see diminishing returns on average. Just for those people out there who have never tried therapy before or might just be getting started, I don't want to scare you off with that and make you think that it's either a year or nothing, right? I certainly don't want to get that across. Most people are satisfied with their therapy results within about 10 to 20 sessions. Okay, so I can put that out there. But it's just, I say that about the year because it's like, or you could take it further. You could dig deeper, you could do more work, you could keep on improving. So you could, however you want to take that. I just didn't want it to seem like, okay, if you're going to be doing this, you better be ready to commit to a whole year. That's not exactly the most common situation.
All right.
All right. So yeah. Why don't I go ahead and share the reflective question for you to take with you and to mull over. Here it is. And I hope it goes in the same vein of what we're talking about. What's the number one area of your life that you are growing in right now, or that you want to grow in? Just to clarify that a little bit, maybe you reflect on your life and you notice a pattern of, this is kind of like a concept that I seem to be orbiting around. I seem to be kind of meditating on. I feel like this particular phrase or this kind of idea seems to be coming back to me over and over again. So to identify what that might be for you, or if it's like, I don't have anything like that. Okay, well, what would you like that to be? What's the one area in your life where it's like, that things can be better. That you have room to grow here and that some changes within reach. Okay, so this is a kind of a heavy question maybe for some people out there, because this isn't something that a lot of us reflect on, unfortunately, in our day-to-day lives. That's why I'm asking it. Be specific. What is the thing? Go ahead and name it. Go ahead and write it down. Go ahead and put it on your fridge or whatever you need to do. Identify what's the one area of your life where you're growing in right now. What's the season you're in with your growth? Or what's the area that you would like that to be?
All right. And as usual, you can always find us on social media. We are on Instagram at embrace.mental.health. We're also on Facebook at facebook.com/emh.nsc. And you can always email us as well at embracementalhealthnsc@gmail.com. And we've got some good and some kind of intense topics coming up. So we're definitely would love to hear feedback, would love for you to share with your friends, and also never forget that you can also subscribe. You can subscribe on YouTube and on Spotify and on the other, all the platforms that we're on, so that you don't miss that. And that's a way for us to get some feedback as well. So, yeah. Also, I've heard a little rumor that some merch might be on the way.
It's
okay. I can
good.
Say it again.
Yeah. Keep an eye out for that. Well, I just wanted to say, I don't think we say this on this podcast very often. I don't know that I've ever heard it, but hey, leave us a good review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. If you are listening to this and you're like, hey, why aren't more people listening to this? I'm finding this to be helpful. I want my friends to be able to discover this podcast. One thing that you can do is to leave us a 5-star review or a 4-star review or whatever feels most honest, preferably something positive. If you have some negative feedback, then go ahead and send that our way so we can actually make a change, right? But yeah, leave us a good review so that people can discover the work that we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, everybody. And also a big thank you to Wes for joining us too. We've been, Wesley is waiting for baby number 3 to come at any moment now. So we've been having fun times trying to figure out how to.
Any second now. I've got my phone. Yeah.
So we're very appreciative of you making the time to record with us. So.
Yeah, well, thank you, Kelsey, for being so flexible and understanding of my situation too. So teamwork makes the dream work. Thank you.
That's for sure. Yep. All right. Have a good week, and hopefully baby Lawton number 3 will be here soon.
Yeah, hopefully. Okay. Thanks for listening.
Bye, everybody.